This is General Orders to Starfleet, General Order 1, also known as the Prime Directive. As the right of each sentient species to live in accordance with its normal cultural evolution is considered sacred, no Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. Such interference includes introducing superior knowledge, strength, or technology to a world whose society is incapable of handling such technologies wisely. Starfleet personnel may not violate this Prime Directive, even to save their lives and or their ship, unless they are acting to right an earlier violation or an accidental contamination of said culture. This directive takes precedence over any and all other considerations and carries with it the highest moral obligation. Well, isn't that just peachy keen? So, basically what they're saying is that during exploration specifically, but in general any kind of encounters with a hitherto unknown species and or civilization, or an existing lower technology civilization, such as, say, our own, the officers and crew of Starfleet are directed to have no interference, to leave no footprint behind, to leave no evidence and or subject material or concept or idea that could have an impact on the particular culture and or civilization being encountered. Well, as we all know, that's a pretty highly upheld concept within the Starfleet, within the Federation in general, and specifically I should say the Starfleet, because I cannot imagine that there are not some members of the Federation who do a tongue-in-cheek in this sort of thing. But there's good and valid reasons for having this Prime Directive. First being, of course, is the total possible modification and or dissolution of a given civilization or culture that has encounters with something that they're not prepared to deal with. The possibilities of a primitive society misconstruing the technology-wielding members of Starfleet as potential gods. We see some moral conundrums and the various TV series, as there's at least at one episode, it seems like pretty much in every TV series, I don't know, maybe DS9 might be the exception to the rule, where the Federation captain and a crew find themselves in a situation where they have to weigh the impact of the Prime Directive or General Order Number 1 against whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. And that's a weighty thing to consider. And yet we see time and time again some tongue-in-cheek, nod-wink, elbow-rubbing kind of stuff where in order to extradite themselves from a given situation, the captain and or crew do violate or at least circumvent General Order Number 1 to achieve their goals. And I can think of in, Star Trek number 4, Going Home or whatever, where they find themselves in 1980s Earth to rescue a couple humpback whales that's going to help eliminate some kind of alien probe, which is never significantly pursued after that particular movie. No, I don't think I've encountered anything that tells me exactly where the probe came from, what it was going on about, and why it went away just because we put a pair of whales, pregnant whales at that, in the ocean of 100 years from now. So what do? The crew repeatedly bumps into modern humanity and has to ooze its way out. Now we see Bones McCoy saving Chekhov using technology that was very advanced compared to what the current technology was of the era. We see the teleporters being used to transport crew members into a highly restricted area to borrow emanations from a nuclear power plant on board the Enterprise aircraft carrier. which was for cause and effect and dramatic encounter. And more importantly, probably even more wide-reaching, was the encounter between Scotty and McCoy when they visited the plastics manufacturing facility and gave basically the footprint for transparent aluminum to the head engineer, chief engineer, or whatever he was, in exchange for much needed supplies of plexiglass that would allow them to transport said whales and a whole lot of water weight into the future. Now, is that not several site cases of violating Prime Directive number 1? Did anybody have a fallout from it? Did it get lost in the fact that the crew was still under more or less disgraced from their actions from the first movies 2 and 3, especially the one for Search for Spock, then where they stole the Enterprise and more or less blew it up, or allowed it to get blown up? I'm just saying. Or was the Federation, especially the Earth contingent on section, overly ecstatic that they managed to pull a rabbit out of their hat, save the world from what kind of unknown types of complete destruction and or modest destruction from an alien probe, upset it couldn't find a whale? Just saying. As a player, as a GM running the game where we're dealing with this sort of thing, you have to ask ourselves, just how far are we following the baseline canon, Gene Roddenberry's vision for the Star Trek universe? Are we trying to uphold the Starfleet orders when they apply, or are we going to do the same thing where we do a tongue-in-cheek, nod your elbow, circumventation or circumventing the general order when it's not convenient for our goals? For the most part, that's a good question. I mean, if you're playing a game where a lot of what you're really doing is true exploration, first contact, there's plenty of opportunities to find yourself in some pretty strange ways, in some pretty strange locations, and in that moral conundrum: do we or do we not act? There's an episode of Star Trek, the original TV series, where a previous crew gets marooned or stranded on a planet that's similar to Earth, and they use their technology, especially phaser technology, to promote their own survival, if you will, to the point of even completely radically changing the political dynamics of the planet and instigating a world war, their version of a world war. And then from there, having to defend themselves, and by the time Kirk and the Enterprise show up, the crew in question, the majority of them are dead. The alien local natives are dominating the Starfleet's faction by sheer numbers of weight of men and women dying and pushing their agenda. And then the captain of the former captain, which I'm sorry, I can't tell you his name or what ship he was, demanding that Kirk take sides with them and to at least provide them with additional phasers, because their current phasers are wearing out and their charges are diminishing and things are going to go really bad for them. So do we step aside and allow that to happen so that the culture on that planet can try to recover, or do we interfere? I think at this point the very last tenet of General Order 1 steps in, where we're going to try to rectify a problem that we've created. Now, keeping in mind that this is just upheld by the Federation, so all of our Federation foes, the Klingons, the Romulans, the Cardassians, etc., 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 majority of them don't have their own version of this. They don't follow the Prime Directive. We see evidence of that as TV in several episodes as well. I can think of one where the Federation needs to get some supplies and it finds out that Klingon raiders are basically utilizing the population to supply them with material, and they help put an end to it, or divert the Klingons. But at this point, the damage has already been done, so it's no longer an issue of Prime Directive and are we violating it. It's an interesting concept. First, the Prime Directive not interfering with alien species. And in my mind, when I created Stellar Frontiers, my backstory showed that humanity is humanity. Lacking this high moral ideal put forward by, say, Gene Roddenberry, what would humanity really do in a given situation? At some point, we find ourselves technologically advanced enough to expand into the known galaxy, and once we get there, we discover, for the most part, we are the little green men, i.e. we have the more advanced technology than anybody else we encounter. We encounter planet after planet of native populations that are dirt-bound because they haven't reached that technology level. Do we coddle them? Do we stand off and leave them alone? Or we do what we would probably really do, based off of human history. If you go back far enough, what did our forebearers do? They explored the far reaches of the planet. They settled colony after colony. Where they didn't settle, they trade ships. Exploration ships were followed by trade ships, by merchants. The merchants exploited the local populations, providing them with materials and goods that they couldn't manufacture themselves, and suddenly discovered they really needed to have a bunch of, because for whatever reason, for 1,000 years prior, they never needed to have this particular item. Now they got to have it. And in exchange, the merchants acquire all kinds of exotic goods and materials, and some of it at extremely low prices, which they transport home to the mainland countries, where they sell it at a huge profit, and just propagates this cycle over and over and over again. So in my space-based game, the history was that humanity explored, then it traded with, and eventually conquered in some locations. It settled in many others, following the same premise. They asked the Native Americans and the Aborigines of Australia what they really think about the fact that their countries, as they could have had it, are no longer viable or possible because the European ancestors basically dominated everything and took what they wanted. So there's the reasoning behind the Prime Directive in some aspects, in my opinion. So, as always, this is the Fat Man, and I'm always interested in anything you have to say in regard to these particular subjects, as weighty as they may be. I always love the opportunity sitting out here and what passes for, what the Iowa Plain once looked like before we settled it and tore it up and farmed it and divided it and so on and so forth. Over there is firehouse number 10, which I'm supposed to be doing the grease trap at 10 o'clock. It's now past 10 a.m. I got here and the fire department fellows were out on a run, and I'm not going to go in and do a grease trap in an empty firehouse. There's nobody here. I don't have any instructions to say otherwise. So I called it in, left them a note. I'm going back to shop. There's a job at 3 o'clock. Maybe these guys will call and I'll come back and do it then. Till next time, keep your General Order 1 handy and follow the Prime Directive.